Yo! This is the complete dungeon progression guide for Ironman. Before you start dungeons, you need to have these three mods installed. Better Map, Legend Room mod, and Skytills. These will all be linked in the description down below. First, before you start dungeons, you need to progress in the actual game first. The requirements you should have before starting dungeons are full end armor with an AOTD or Void Sword, 100 plus magical power, AOTE, and they start on a farming and mining setup. Do not rush higher floor dungeons with no money making method. It gets really expensive, you'll need a good farming setup and mining setup for later floors. Dungeons should only be played during Paul. If Paul is not in progress, please work on other parts of the game. Dungeons will be so much more enjoyable if you only do it during Paul. If you meet the bare minimum recs, you should load into an entrance floor as mage or tank. You can kill the mobs in the entrance floor with the Seismic Wave ability or your mage ult. Do this until you have a full set of rotten or some type of armor and a Dreadlord sword. As soon as you get this, you're ready to move on to F1. F1 is really simple. Depending on what class you pick, you would want to use Dungeon Armor or Reforged to whatever class you choose, so Y is for Mage, and Fierce for Burrs, and use AOTD for Burrs, and Dreadlord Sword for Mage. I would recommend for F1 to go either Mage or Burrs, because that would be easiest for gear you have. All you want from this floor is really a Bonzo Mask, so it's up to you if you do 50 runs for collection or be impatient and buy it from the chest. If you drop a Bonzo Staff, I would recommend buying it, but you don't have to, and you can get it later down the line. Because Dreadlord Sword is just better than Bonzo Staff. End goal for F1 is to get a Bonzo Mask, and maybe replace your Dreadlord Sword and Dungeon Gear with F1 version, so it scales better. F2 is just as easy as F1. You would wear full Dungeon Armor with a Bonzo Mask as Burrs, and Dark Goggles for Mage. You want to buy all Scarf Studies you drop, and a couple of red scarves if you drop them, and make sure you drop one adaptive belt. I would say you do around 15 F2s, which will get you to around Kata 10 to move on to F3. The end goal for F2 is to have at least one Scarf Studies, an adaptive belt, and maybe a couple of red scarves. F3 is where you finally get upgrades to your armor. You want to do one completion on F3 to get the Saul's recommendation. This allows you to frag run. You would want to frag run entrances to kill Lost Adventurers and get a bunch of dragon fragments to make armor. You want Young Armor for Mage class, Unstable Armor for Burrs or Archer, and Holy if you plan on playing tank. I do not recommend playing tank until F7, so don't play tank, but you can if you want with Holy. So your setup should be 3/4 Unstable with a Bonzo Mask for Burrs, and 3/4 Young with Dark Goggles for Mage. Then you just run F3 until you get Kata 14 plus, and then move on to F4. All drops from F3 are really shit, so only buy recoms and different ultimate enchantment books. Once you have Kata 14, you can move on to F4. F4 is where you actually get upgrades to your weapon for any class you play. This also means you will have to have a better money making method. So you should have a good enough farming setup to make at least 8 mil an hour, or just a decent mining setup. This floor is where you can actually pick what class you want to be. You can be an archer and drop the spirit bow, or just continue as mage and get yourself a spirit scepter. You also can get a burst upgrade, being the spirit sword, and upgrade it into the Bone Reaver with 5 spirit bones. If you do want to craft the Bone Reaver, you will need a lot of bones, so be sure to place the skeleton when you're done. All the drops you need from the floor are Lead Spirit Pet, Bone Necklace, and even if you're not playing Mage, I would get Spirit Scepter for outside of dungeons. F4 is where you would want to get a Lead Sheep Pet for Mage, and at least an Epic Tiger for Burrs or Arch. End goal for F4 is to get at least Kata 18 and get all the drops for your class, including Spirit Pet and Bone Necklace. Once you have Kata 15 and all the drops, we can move on to F5. Your setup should be 3/4 dragon armor on whatever class you pick, with either a bonzo mask, tarantula helmet, or shadow goggles for mage. F5 progresses burrs and archer heavily, with unlocking shadow assassin gear. You want to go for S8 legs and boots as soon as possible, and if you drop chest plate early, I would buy it, but if you don't, then just chalk it. You can just use your dragon's chest plate or drop a golden knight chest plate and use that instead. I would recommend only metering Shadow Fury, who is the only weapon that's not from collection, and it's a pretty good melee weapon outside of dungeons. If you're burst and you don't have a Bone Reaver, I would recommend just buying a Livid Dagger, because I don't think you'll do 150 runs in time for when you want to do F6. F5 is where it actually gets more expensive, because you need to buy all the Fumings and Legions, and all the Dark Orb you drop. You also need to buy a Shadow Assassin Cloak, so this might need for you to improve your farming setup, or mining setup. The one thing I urge you please don't buy is a Last Breath, because you get that from collection, and by the time you actually need it, you'll definitely have the collection. Do F5s until you have Kata 23+. You don't need to grind out for Shadow Fury, because Giant Sword is just better, and grinding F6 is more worth for the Kata XP. So just do F5 for the Kata 23 and Shadow Assassin gear. F6 is where you now want a really good farming setup and mining setup. Everything is super expensive on this floor, and you're going to drop a lot of recomps. F6 is also where party finding becomes very frustrating, with the need of a tank and a bunch of incompetent inbreds. If you're playing Archer, you should use Spirit Bow or Juju, preferably Juju. And if you're Burrs, you should use Shadow Fury, Livid Dagger, or Bone Reaver, both using a Tiger Pet. Mage should stick with 3/4 Young, and after a completion of F6, upgrade their Shadow Goggles to Wither Goggles, while using a Lead cheat pet. F6 will drop Necrolord armor, which will replace your Young armor for more survivability as Mage. For Burrs, you want to try and get a Giant Sword or a Fell Scroll to upgrade your melee weapon. You want to buy any RNG drop you get, including Precursor Eye, Summoning Ring, Soul Reaver Gloves, and Necromancer Sword. Don't feel pressure to drop everything, just buy it if you get it. The only thing you need is one type of summoning item and the Soul Reaver Gloves. The rest are completely optional to grind for. I would grind F6 until you get Kata 28, and then you can try and move on to F7. Before even thinking about F7, you need to have either a max farming setup or max mining setup, or close to it, because you need a lot of coins to do F7. If you struggle finding parties, I would just keep grinding F6 until you get Kata 30, then you'll definitely find parties. But if you want to get better parties, I would recommend to play tank on F7. The setup that will initially get you started on tank is half Necrolord, 3/4 Giant, a Mender Crown or Reaper Mask, 3/4 Giant, and either a heavy chestplate or just one of your dragon chestplates with a Baby Yeti or Ledge for the Whale Pet. This might also require you to have a higher Kata, like Kata 30. If you play tank, you should have a clear set, so don't just do true tank, the party will not like you. If you sometimes die in boss while playing tank, I would recommend just switching to a Bonzo Mask for an extra life and then switching back to the Reaper or Metacraft. If you play Archer in F7, you should have a Juju. Do not use Spirit Bow in F7, please. If you play Burrs in F7, you should have either a Giant Sword, Shadow Fury, or Felthorn Reaper. The gear for these two classes should still be half SA with Zombie Knight Chest and Terra Helm or Bonzo Mask, and use Tiger Pet for damage or Baby Yeti for survivability. Do not play Mage in F7, please. Spirit Scepter Mage is terrible, and even with Midas Staff, it is still not viable. For the F7 boss fight, you need a Bonzer Staff or Jerry Sheen Gun to help get crystals. And if you play tank, you need to get Jingle Bells to get aggro. The first rounds on F7 will be miserable. You're getting parties with no tank and freak inbreds who don't know what they're doing. But you will drop wither pieces in these rounds, which will give you upgrades to all classes. You would get Necron boots and Necron legs for archer and burrs, and golder boots and golder legs for tank. Eventually you drop the wither chestplate, so you have 4 Necron as archer or 4 golder as tank. All the drops in F7 are self-explanatory. You want to mainly work towards your hype, but you also get precursor gears, which are the best damage reforged in the game. Wither cloak, which helps a lot in boss fight. Get a free legendary talisman with auto recon, and wither bloods for your melee weapons. F7 boss fight is where you actually need to know what you're doing, unlike the other floors, which are kind of self-explanatory. If you're archer or burrs in phase 1, your job is to get crystals. This can be done by using a bonzo staff or berry shotgun. If you're playing tank, you want to use jingle bells to get aggro on max sword and lead it into the laser. In the second phase of the boss fight, burrs and archers should be the one crushing, while tank is the one leading it under the pillar. The third phase is kind of self-explanatory. Just make sure you have all the terminal solvers on in Skytils. The last phase will just need a good DPS archer, because the only way you can fail it is if you don't do enough DPS. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you found this guide useful, and make sure you like, subscribe, comment. Peace.